Chapter 69. Approaching God. Exodus chapter 20, verses 22 to 26. And the Lord said unto Moses, Thus thou shalt say unto the children of Israel, Ye have seen that I have talked with you from heaven. Ye shall not make with me gods of silver, neither shall ye make unto you gods of gold. An altar of earth thou shalt make unto me, and shalt sacrifice thereon thy burnt offerings and thy peace offerings. Thy sheep and thine oxen in all places where I record my name, I will come unto thee, and I will bless thee. And if thou wilt make me an altar of stone, thou shalt not build it of hewn stone, for if thou lift up thy tool upon it, thou hast polluted it. Neither shalt thou go up by steps unto mine altar, that thy nakedness be not discovered thereon. Exodus chapter 20, verses 22 to 26. In these verses, we have some laws of worship. First, there is a prohibition of idolatry, verses 22 and 23, and second, instructions concerning an altar, verses 24 to 26. The law against making idols specifies images of silver and gold. Gispen's comment is very good. Gold and silver are mentioned specifically to make clear that even the most precious and valuable things could not be compared to him who spoke from heaven. It does not mean that simple images made of wood or stone were permissible. Idolatry is the attempt to make God comprehensible to man by giving an intellectual concept a physical form. Thus, some gods are depicted, as in India, with many eyes to indicate they are all-seeing, or with many hands to indicate that they are omnipotent. The fallacy is, among other things, that it delimits God to what man considers important. The same thing can be done intellectually. Thus, liberals in the churches tell us that God is love, a biblical statement, 1 John chapter 4, verse 8, but taken alone, it represents a falsification, for we are told, among many other things, that our God is a consuming fire, Hebrews chapter 12, verse 29. In idolatry, man plays the revealer. He tells us what God is and seeks to give us what, to him, is a nobler view of God. Polytheism develops logically out of humanism because humanism refuses to recognize an ultimate unity in and behind the universe. We are told that we live in a multiverse, not a universe, which means that many conflicting quote-unquote truths exist, as well as conflicting powers. The creation of images in history has been a rejection of any ultimate unity in favor of a multiplicity of powers. Such religions can posit an ultimate oneness as a blind source of things while ascribing authority to the many powers which have arisen. This is true of Hinduism and Buddhism. In idolatry, men reshape the facts of reality to suit themselves. They refuse to see the wholeness of God and His creation and insist on giving us an edited view of reality. There may thus be idolatry where there is no mention of God. Men who insist, for example, on the natural goodness of man or on his moral neutrality are creating an idol whether they acknowledge it or not. In verses 24 to 26, we have laws regarding altars. The Hebrew word for altar is mizbeha, meaning sacrificial slaughter. An altar is a table whereon gifts to God are placed, or where God requires certain sacrifices. An altar is clearly associated with food, which represents life. Until recently, The family table retained some aspects of the altar. It was a place for food, for family communion, and for prayers. The family altar. To be invited to eat at a man's table meant, and still means for many, to be offered friendship and communion, a bond of peace. In some countries, a foreign man is not safe until someone receives him into communion at his table. In the Bible, the altar received clean animal sacrifices, grains, wine, and incense in the main. The altar also provided asylum. Whatever foods were placed on the altar were called food or the bread of your God. Leviticus chapter 22, verse 25. The altar was also called the Lord's table. Ezekiel chapter 41, verse 22, chapter 44, verse 16, Malachi chapter 1, verse 7 and verse 12. It was at the altar that God's glory appeared to his people in Leviticus chapter 9, verses 22 to 25. With the Reformation, the importance of the family table came in for renewed emphasis as a place of grace and thanksgiving. If this is lacking at the family table, this recognition that God makes tables a place of grace, thanksgiving, and peace, the sacrament of communion will be little more than a mystical self-communion. The table and its food are necessary for life, hence the blood, which is the life of all flesh, Genesis chapter 9, verse 4, had to be restored to God. It could not be eaten. It had to be dedicated to God. Animals slain for food had to be slain at the tabernacle door, Leviticus chapter 17, verses 1 to 5. Game animals could be bled in the fields, but the blood had to be covered with dirt, Leviticus chapter 17, verses 13 and 14. To this day, Armenian Christians take their animals to a stone near the church steps to slaughter and to give the priest his portion. The altar represented, first of all, atonement, and then peace with God. After the fall of Jerusalem in the Jewish-Roman War, AD 66 to 70, the Jewish family table replaced the altar in Jewish thought. A like concept of the family table developed in time in Christendom, especially with the Puritans. Repeatedly within the Church there have been strong emphases on the Lord's table. Such concerns for liturgical renewal usually wane if there is not an analogous emphasis on the family table. We have in verses 24 to 26 laws concerning the nature of an altar before God himself gave the laws for the construction thereof. God can prescribe the manner of construction for an altar, but man cannot. 3 rules are laid down. First, an altar of earth was acceptable. This could be no more than earth heaped up, or better, a natural high spot where the earth was naturally packed and hard. Second, an altar of stone would be a more convenient one where stones were available and could be piled up to make a high and large surface for sacrificing animals. The stones could not be hewn, but had to be natural. No implements could be used to make the altar, only stones collected and placed together, as in some drywall stone construction. Because the altar signifies atonement, peace, and communion, all God's work of grace towards us, man could have no part in shaping the altar by his handiwork. Later, God would give precise directions for the making of the tabernacle and all its furnishings. The altar was thus made only at his direction. Third, there could be no steps against the altar lest man's nakedness be discovered. Verse 26. Subsequently, in Ezekiel chapter 43, verse 17, we see directions given for steps on the east side of the altar. This is not a contradiction because here God requires it, as in Exodus chapter 20, verse 26, he forbids it. The objection in this latter case is to man's design, not to steps as such. Man's ideas are not to govern salvation. Nakedness has reference to the same fact. Although priests were to be garbed fully as the law required, the essential nakedness was a religious one. It refers to man's attempts to negotiate with God on the premise of the validity of man's thinking. This entire passage is against such a belief. We can only approach God on His terms, never on ours. When He says come, we must come, and when He says go, we must go. The best that we can offer does not commend us to God, neither gold nor silver, verse 23, nor our best efforts, nor thinking. Only His work and words can bring us to Him and bless us and our service. As Paul says in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10, "For we are His workmanship, created in Christ Jesus unto good works, which God hath before ordained that we should walk in them."